All right, let's begin. Thank you for attending the roundtable discussion. This is our first CCP Civil Power Talk Forum. This will be led by Scott Turnbow, Vice President at TVA, Steve Cherry, Construction Division Manager at Jacobs, Matt Cronlin, Assistant Vice President at Merrill Lynch Wealth Management. My name's Stuart Keeter. I'll be the facilitator for the forum. I'm a senior consultant here at MRI Raleigh. MRI, or Management Recruiters, is a Forbes top executive recruiting company, and I recruit top talent for companies in the civil, power, and environmental area. To cover some housekeeping issues, following and during the discussion here, members can ask questions in this forum. Now, I've participated in a couple of these forums so far and discovered that unmuting people and video cams can cause some pretty big issues. So to simplify the process, please stay muted during the conversations. Now, to ask a question, please find the chat button at the bottom of your screen and select Stu Keeter. Then type your question into the discussion box. I'll read it at the end of the discussion. Now, if you have a question for a specific member of the forum, Scott, Matt, or Steve, please type in their name and then ask the question. For an example here, Scott, how's the TVA community dealing with the natural disasters on top of the COVID? Now, if you can't find the chat tool, or you're driving, or there's just issues there, just shoot me an email with your question. My email address is Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T, at mriraleigh.com. Or you can text my cell phone number. It's 919-656-6931. Again, 919-656-6931. And if you think of a question later on, please email it and I'll shoot it to the forum. Really, the hope here is to share information with each other so we can navigate this COVID issue together. So let's start. Let's begin the forum. Let's start with Matt. Matt is the Assistant Vice President for Merrill Lynch Wealth Management. Matt, can you kind of give us an update on an overview on what is going on in the marketplace right now and what the future looks like?
Sure, Stuart. Happy to. So good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining the call. I'll try and keep this, real high level, and we can get a little deeper as we go along, or feel free to ask questions. I'm going to speak a lot of generalities, and I'm doing that on purpose. In that I don't know all of you individually and your individual circumstances, so I'm just going to try and keep this high level from a macroeconomic or a market level perspective, if you will. Think of it, just like roundtable, fireside chats. We're just sitting around talking. So if anybody has any questions, feel free, and we'll either get them now or certainly get them later. Along that same line, what I'm saying today is not particularly prepared sound bites from the greater organization. What I'm talking about are just my thoughts, and not necessarily those that we have hundreds of analysts and economists and different perspectives that apply from a market fundamental perspective or a short-term technical perspective. But again, I'm just going to talk about generalities and just give us a high-level update of what we're seeing here. So, that being said, these are tough times. Pretty much no matter where you look, whether you talk from a market perspective, a corporate perspective, a public health perspective, and I think one of the main questions from everybody is, when is this going to end? And that always, I always turn around with a follow-up question to that and say, well, what do you mean? Do you mean from a public health perspective or a market perspective? When can my kids go back to school? Those are all certain questions, and certainly, on everybody's mind. So One thing I'm going to highlight here is just, particularly a little bit more about, the market perspective. I'm going to try and stay away from, political commentary or are we doing all that we can? Is our stimulus going to the right places? But maybe I can hopefully give you just an idea of, what we're seeing from a market perspective, and then maybe, maybe that in hopes that that lowers your stress level a little bit by being a little bit more informed. So at a high level, my takeaways for today, number one is make sure you're keeping a perspective on all this. I think it's very easy to, watch the news or hear, anecdotal stories. But remember, when you're watching the news by definition is the exception to the norm. So the fact that, hundreds of millions of Americans went to work today, maybe at home, but they still did go to work today. That's not what you're going to hear about on the news. You're going to hear about this, scenario in this particular hotspot or this group that's been affected. And I'm certainly not downplaying the impact. I'm just saying that we have to keep that in perspective. Secondly, I'll say let's focus. Some of you probably hear these quotes. Let's just take it one day at a time. Let's focus on what we can control. Let's get back to what's important. I think all of those are good to remember as well. So let's get to it. So on the market side, we're seeing all kinds of information, lots of sources, whether from the White House, whether it's Dr. Fauci, whether it's our local municipalities. But I think you agree with me that pretty much everything across the board sounds pretty bleak. Best case, we hear the growth rate is decelerating, or maybe we hear a few recoveries here and there. But I think obviously the central issue here is the virus. There are other things that go along with it from the energy side, but I think what's on everybody's mind is the virus, and the market is the same way. The market's worried about the virus. But going back to my point about perspective, if you look at the market, and I'll define that as the S&P is down about 13% as of now, year to date. And I think if you don't follow the market day to day, sometimes I think that would be surprising. If you ran into somebody or your friend and you asked them, how do you think the market's doing? I don't think they would guess that the market on average is only down 13%. Certainly some down more, some down less. But keeping that in a context, that the level of the S&P now is the same value of where it was multiple points last year. So 6 months ago, 9 months ago, 12 months ago, we had several pullbacks last year that were normal. But it certainly doesn't feel that way because of what's happened before that. The market was down 30% a month ago from its high. And then a month before that, was the high. So within 60 days, we went from all-time high to down 30% to now we're up to, where we're down about 13%. So why did that happen? How did we get here? High level, again, we start off, the expectation, if we can think back before the virus, when we used to be able to go to work and travel and maybe even go to a restaurant, the expectations, particularly for the U.S. economy, were strong. Unemployment record lows, and then that quickly turned. With the virus coming onto our shores, and then us being able to really be confronted with it. And what happened then? The market says, I don't like this. I don't feel comfortable with this. I don't understand it. The market does not like being surprised. The market does not like uncertainty. So that's what you saw when you went from your all-time highs 2 months ago to 1 month ago. And I think that a good quote I heard from one of our economists was, the market is going to stop panicking when policymakers start. The market was dropping. The market was pushing our policymakers to say, you need to do something about this. What is our coordinated response going to be? And then in March, we began to see that with the surprise Fed moves, and then the stimulus packages started to roll out. But what you ended up seeing in the last month is the largest and fastest peacetime stimulus ever. Lessons we've learned from the last 100 years, the Depression, whether it's 2008, 2009, what you saw was the Fed jumping out, getting ready. Then you saw the politicians getting things done. Still a little bit of pointing fingers, but in the end, they realized they needed to get things moving. So you have the CARES Act. Now you got CARES Act 2.0, and so I think it's obvious that you've seen some healing from a market perspective. But when we watch the evening news, we see some of the worst unemployment numbers that we've ever seen before, losing millions and millions of dollars. And yet that very same day when those unemployment numbers come out, the market goes up. And how is that possible? How can you have some of the worst numbers that we've ever seen before, and yet the market goes up? And that's really what we've seen in the last month. And it's because the market is not the economy, and the economy is not the market. So significant declines across the board in employment numbers, GDP numbers. Corporations are needing to adjust, obviously, and all of that is priced into the market. The market is looking forward 6 months, 9 months usually, on what we expect to happen. So if I boil it down to think of small company widget maker, a few employees, they manufacture widgets. And it's just come out in the news that widgets are going to be obsolete in 20 years. Well, at the moment that news report comes out, all of the stock market analysts are going to downgrade those companies. All of the stockholders are going to dump the shares of those companies because they know that in the future, widgets are going to be obsolete. And therefore, that widget maker business is going to be obsolete. But what happens? Well, the widget maker company begins to adjust. The management says, hey, can we cut some corners here? Can we, take a look at some R&D work we've been working on to find new uses for those widgets? How can we adjust? We still have contracts to provide those widgets for the next 20 years. But what you've seen is the market immediately adjusts in anticipation of what is going to happen. And by the time it's reflected in the economy, it's old news. So when you see the GDP reports and you see the unemployment reports, that's in the past. And it's very, very hard to separate the two when we're locked in our homes or we're not able to go out to eat or not to see our family and friends. I'm pointing out here there's a difference in perspective in what the market is showing us and what the future is showing us and what we're feeling inside. And as individuals, oftentimes that makes us feel like we need to do something, and that proves disastrous when we do it in the absence of acting within our long-term plan, if it's just a reaction. So in short, I'll sum it up here that our expectation for the remainder of the year, a little better as the year goes on, but I'd say very bumpy. Keep your seatbelts on. Use a process to make decisions. Be steadfast with your plan and your risk levels. And then try and separate yourself by focusing on what's maybe really important. Maybe that's your family. Maybe that's health. We're going to get through this. The question is not if we're going to get through it, but when we're going to get through it, and that depends on the context. So focus on your plan, focus on what you control, and keep perspective. So I'll pause there to turn it back over to Stu, or if anybody has any questions.
Matt, that's great. Thank you, man. Next up is going to be Steve Cherry from Jacobs. Steve Cherry is the division construction manager for Jacobs. Now, Steve, you just recently moved to Nevada for a huge project, and I understand y'all just started back working on the project. How did you prioritize the work on the project, and then kind of picking who is essential and who's not for the different phases?
Stu, those are great questions. And what I'd like to do, I'd like to sort of give a overview of our portfolio of projects. We have a lot of infrastructure projects, water, sewer, road construction. We also have several vertical new office type structures going up. And then we have our mining operations up in the north. So one of the things that we had to do as far as getting back to work for our client is we had to prioritize those projects with top stakeholder buy-in. And I will say this, our mining operations are the only projects that we have started back now. And with that, we had to get educated. You know, this is something new that has hit all of us. And, you know, we had to know how to react. We started out with around 10 to 12 advisors within the company. And we broke that down to two advisors, our director of safety and our top medical officer within the company. With those two, we had to get educated on COVID-19. What is this virus? How do we protect our workers and our staff from getting, passing this on to each other? So we sat down, we developed plans, and with the help of our client, prioritizing the projects and getting our mining operations, we started those mining operations back a little over 3 weeks ago. So it was a phased, approach with buy-in from all our stakeholders within Jacobs and our client. And we have been successful in starting our mining operations back. I will say this, we are looking at starting our other infrastructure projects back at a phased approach. And we're hoping right now, our plan is to have all our portfolio of projects back online late June, early July timeframe.
Great. And how does the daily operation change as far as safety due to the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, so our daily operations, and I will say this, the policies and recommendations that we have had to set with our mining operations, we're losing about 2 hours a day in efficiencies. I will say this, it started really slow. We have every day, we have requirements that we go through with our mining staff to make sure that they're protected. As far as testing of our employees, we rely a lot on them and our medical staff. So let's say, for instance, in one of our mining operations, if you don't feel good that day, then what you do is you stay at home, and then you contact your medical provider, or you contact our chief medical officer, and there's a series of questions that are asked. And from those series of questions, that will guide you with the other recommendations and policies that we have in place.
Great. Now, what testing are you doing on the employees that are working currently?
In our mining operations right now, it's if someone is feeling sick, they're to immediately contact their general foreman, superintendent. We get that person to our medical staff there at the mining operations, and they go through a series of procedures to find out what is actually wrong with that person. If that person is does have symptoms, of course, they're immediately taken off site and to the local North Vegas hospital here. So there's a lot of policies that we have in place to getting those employees there. I will say this, we have had 0 instances where we have had anyone, that had to be transported or is feeling ill.
Now with the news you hear, social distancing, is there, I guess, a way that you're keeping the employees 6 feet apart while they're working?
Yes, what we did there, this also goes back to the education, and we had to educate the employees. With the proper PPE that our employees are wearing, keeping the 6-foot distance it was really hard at first. So, but now it has become sort of second nature to our workers. If we have 2 workers that has to be in very close 6 feet proximity with each other for over 15 minutes, then the full policy of PPE is required. But if those 2 people are just there for 30 seconds, 1-2 minutes, then we fall back to our policy B. So I will say this, it was a little awkward at first for our mining staff, but these guys, they work 1,000 feet underground and they're in there 10 hours a day, and they have done exceptional. I can't appreciate the support of the unions in helping with this endeavor. And so far it's been very, very successful.
Now, Steve, there's always that small percentage of employees that try to take advantage of situations. Now, have you seen any of that as far as employees taking advantage of the COVID situation here?
Well, to be honest, our whole construction division out west, is right around 2,800 people. And honestly, we've had maybe a half dozen people that's tried to go down that avenue. We've worked with our human resources, labor relations to actually get to the root of their actual cause. Why do you really not want to work? So using our HR and LR partners, we've had a huge success in educating the people to get back to work. And, it all goes back to education. You hear a lot of things out there, and once you really get the people that know and they educate you, and you're able to transmit that information down to the local craft level, they open up their eyes, and it's been really good.
And I think you hit this earlier, but what I guess with all the changes that's happening daily, how are you getting that information flow to the employees with the new COVID updates?
Yeah, so any new update that we have to the COVID-19 policies, those are held daily. Let's say, for instance, and I'll give you an instance yesterday. I was advised that we had a new COVID update. What did we do before the mining operation started? We got every craft person together. That information was transmitted to the craft, the superintendents, the general foreman, and the actual construction managers there on site. We take the time, and you have to be patient during this process, because conveying information and ensuring that people understand it is very key. So being able to speak clearly, and it also goes back to the craft and your staff trusting the information that you have. And I can't say enough about our chief medical officer and our director of safety being able to convey those messages clearly and to where everyone understands the information that comes out.
Now, Steve, on the operations side, have you had any, I guess, challenges with the superintendent, the foreman, supervisor side of the house? You know, for example, these guys are usually really direct. They push the employees to make the timelines on the project, and just making sure nobody's, you know, showing up late or missing work. You know, how have you changed the mentality with them?
Well, actually, it was pretty easy, Stu. You know, this COVID-19 epidemic that we're going through, it's hit everyone in the U.S. And being able to educate them, to show them the policies and the requirement that we have put in place to ensure that we protect them and their coworkers was instrumental.
Very good. And thanks, Steve. I mean, this is great information here. And next up is Scott Turnbow. Scott Turnbow is the Vice President of Civil Projects, Equipment Support Services, and CCP Management for TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. Now, Scott, you had to deal with tornadoes, flooding on top of all the COVID pandemic. How's the recovery going? How's everything with TVA going?
Well, to be quite frank with you, overall, I would say everyone at TVA has responded just as we prepare and plan for. And what I mean by that is, as a power utility, and this is the way it is across the entire country, is, you know, you're expected to be there providing power regardless of what's going on around the world and whatever situations are happening. So we actually prepare and plan for all kinds of different types of emergencies and drill on those so that if something happens, we at least have a skeleton structure, a way to respond quickly. And so in this case, you know, we have certainly had challenges along the way, but certainly also have responded quite well with multiple disasters happening. We had a bunch of tornadoes hit in Middle Tennessee. Of course, our service area, if you're not familiar with it, is Tennessee, Kentucky, northern Alabama, northern Georgia, northern Mississippi. And so we had some tornadoes hit right in the middle of Tennessee back in March, early March. And then we've had more tornadoes hit just a couple of weeks ago right here where I'm at in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so it really has impacted our ability to serve people. And there have been people who have been out of power during that time frame and dealing with the COVID incidents of being self-isolated. But overall, responded very well, and we've got everybody back with power at the moment.
No, that's great. Now, can you discuss and define how you defined essential for your workforce?
Yes, in general, since we are a utility, the utility is essential, as you would understand. And so what we did early on is we went to a telework status in roughly mid-March. And so what that means is, you know, anybody at our company who could work from home went to their house and started working from home, much like everybody else did. And so that we deemed non-essential employment or employees, but we still kept them working. Everything has just continued to click just like normal. And so those people are at work, working from home, just like I am at the moment. And then the activities that are in the field that either were a critical project that was ongoing, and the area, my area is usually environmental projects, coal ash, dam safety type projects. And so we have some rather large projects that have definitive deadlines on them coming up from a regulatory standpoint and a dam safety standpoint. And so we deemed those as critical, and we continued to work them. People on site that could work from home, you know, administrative type people, maybe project control specialists, project managers, some of those we sent to the house and let them work remotely and minimize the people that were on site to certainly allow for that social distancing aspect.
No, that's great. Now, did you have to do anything, you know, externally or internally to really prove essential? Now, I'm hearing from the market that, especially on the construction side, that you know, construction is deemed essential in a lot of arenas where you know, there's other industries not not deemed essential, where there's conflict coming from the others, right? That they're questioning, why you're essential. Did you have to do anything with that, with marketing, outside and marketing and internally too, to make sure your employees felt essential, I guess?
Yeah, well, since I think because we were able to keep everybody employed throughout this endeavor, we haven't had a lot of negative press about that. That's part number one. Part number two, being a utility and people wanting that power and needing electricity, it's kind of obvious that becomes essential. And then thirdly, of course, we're part of the U.S. government. Even though we take no tax dollars to operate, it's all self-funded through rates and the sale of electricity. Still being connected to the government, we have a letter that deems us as essential, that for travel purposes and for getting work done across different state lines and counties, from the Attorney General Barr, and then also, of course, from our CEO himself. And so those two allow us, if there's any kind of conflict in traveling from maybe one county to another or across state lines where they've restricted access, that gives us that right to go forward. Does that help,
Great.
Stu?
No, that's great. So, kind of on that topic though, did all your employees get this letter? So if they got stopped, did you have to give them a letter to prove that they are deemed essential?
Every person at TVA, if they're on TVA business, has that letter available to them to use.
Great.
Yep.
No, that's great. Now, touching the employees and job site and public safety a little bit. Now, what have y'all been doing really to keep safe with this new reality? And how do you make your employees feel safe working in this new reality?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of things that Steve said are the same things we have done, or some version of those. And, right out of the gates at the very beginning of this, as everybody is scared. They're scared for their own personal safety. They're afraid that if they go to work and they contract the disease from somebody at work and they take it home to their family, they're worried about their family getting it. And then on top of that, no one really wants to not be working, because you need income to be able to provide food for your family. So you have all those challenges and anxieties that people are dealing with. And so what we did is, number one, we just tried to manage the fear, a lot like Matt was talking about. You got to manage people's fear along this thing. It's going to be okay. And we tried to do that. And we did that by, number one, saying, hey, we're planning to continue to work. We're not sending anybody home. You're going to have that income. And then to make sure that we can continue to work safely and nobody contracts the disease, at least on the job, is we implemented a tracking sheet, or an actual self-evaluation sheet, I should call it, that we ask all of our employees before they show up on site. And that means our TVA Blue Badge, full-time employees as well as contractors, to fill out this sheet to do a self-evaluation. If they're feeling sick, if they have they maybe were in contact with somebody they know that is feeling sick, we ask them to stay off the job site for 14 days. If they start to really have some symptoms, to be tested, et cetera, et cetera. But we try to put that in place early on across the entire company and on our construction sites. And that has proven to make people feel better, and ultimately eliminate. We have had in my organization, we have had no incidences of COVID-19, not one. And then across TVA, it's been less than 0.002%. So really, really low. And everyone that we've had that has contracted it along the way as a company has recovered. And so right now we have no active cases at all. Is that helpful, Steve?
No, that's great. Thank you. Now, as far as safety goes, and with changing your regulations to incorporate COVID regulations, what have you done? Have you implemented like new health checks, taking temperature checks, wash stations, incorporating telehealth as an option?
Yeah. Overall, for the company, and definitely on the construction projects that I'm working, we have not implemented, like a checking every person as they walk in the gate with a thermometer. We have done the self-check, like I talked about a second ago, asking them to fill out a sheet. And then from an actual PPE standpoint, we practice social distancing, the 6 feet separation, where we, in most cases, if for some reason, like you're working on a drill rig or you're working on some sort of piece of equipment and there's a couple of people working on that, obviously it's going to be hard to maintain 6 feet of separation. But just like Steve said, in that particular case, we make sure we sanitize the equipment. We make sure that they have a mask if they're in that type of environment and they're working that close. They have gloves on, et cetera, et cetera. And, overall, I think the guys have done very well with it. And certainly that first week was a challenge, no question. A lot of people were very scared. But, several weeks into it, now we've been going at this, 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And I was at job sites this week myself, and everything seems to be progressing just as normal, just everybody spread out a little bit.
Now, from I guess an issue standpoint, and really a procurement issue, are you having any issues getting safety, PPE, mask, anything like that?
Well, to be honest with you, early on when we saw this starting to kind of unfold across the United States, so like back in January time frame, early February, we went ahead and ordered a bunch of stuff. At least my organization did, like mask, like sanitizer. We could kind of see it coming, and so we got those orders in, and then we were able to, once we got into this situation, and now you can't find standard Purell, standard wipes, things you see at the Home Depot or you see at Walmart, the things you're used to seeing. We started using some different type sourcing, like I'm sure everybody else on the call is too, where you're buying sanitizer in 55-gallon drums, and it's not Purell, it's more of an alcohol-based sanitizer. And now you have to find ways to bottle that and get that out to your teams. You're spraying, you're doing things different than you have normally done. And so we basically set up, I have the equipment support services for TVA, have 3 regional facilities, and at those facilities we've used those as a distribution center for that bulk material, getting it in there and then getting into smaller quantities, and then making sure each of our construction sites have those smaller quantities available to them.
That's great. So the COVID updates are happening daily, and with these new changes, how are y'all implementing the changes into daily operations as far as even communicating internally to your group?
Yep. So on a broad basis for the entire company, we have a daily call where emergency management folks are running that call and updating the key business units on the changes. They're updating people on supplies, et cetera. But the main thing is, like you're talking about, the changes in how we're dealing with the COVID incidents is coming out of that call, and then it cascades down through my organization. We do 2 daily calls for 2 different groups of people every day, and continue to just touch base. So the first week, I'm telling you, man, was chaotic. But now that we're in this kind of found our rhythm, so to speak, those calls are going very smoothly. There's not a lot of updates to it, and it's not changing as much as it did in those first few weeks.
Great. Now, how are you prioritizing the work, and has the COVID implemented a delay with schedules?
There are a couple of projects. There were like some big projects that we had planned to start a month ago that for obvious reasons, we put them on hold and said, well, we'll start those a little bit later because we could. And so we've delayed a few projects, but most things that were big, that were already in play, we did not slow them down at all. And it's a little hard to quantify if there's really an impact to productivity. I'm not seeing it at the moment. There may be some, but at the moment, I think so far we've been moving right along, and our schedule is intact.
Very good, very good. And how's the information on the new policies changing, and as far as disseminating that information?
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing I've mentioned earlier. Kind of same idea is that is coming out daily. At least we keep our finger on the pulse daily, and so as those changes happen, we disseminate that information that day, real time. And to be honest with you, we're really at the moment looking at a reintegration plan how do we get back to normal? And so that's the one we're working on this week, is how we start to bring people back into the office complex. At what pace do you do that? And at what pace do you ramp up back to, instead of minimum essential, back to our normal daily? So we're looking at that and putting those plans together this week as a company.
This is great. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's clear our industry's really been affected by some of these massive changes, and again, I like to open up the forum to get some questions. So find the chat box to ask the questions, and if there's a particular forum member, put their name, Matt, Steve, or Scott, if you want to ask them something in particular there. But the first question is for Scott. This is coming from Ewan at Georgia Power. How do you quantify the lost productivity due to the COVID-19 crisis?
It's like kind of a comment I made a little earlier, was it's really hard to quantify what that impact is, and if there is even an impact. So for us, I don't think we've really seen a big impact on any of our jobs. And I should have said this earlier too. All of our facilities are kind of remotely located. They're not located in a major city, so they're located out in the country somewhere, in most cases, out remotely. So the opportunity for impact is less, and I think that's a key component to why we've been able to be successful in working our way through this. And the other thing is we've just been blessed, so we're thankful that we haven't had any impact with any people.
Scott, here's another question for you. How does TVA respond differently for COVID than really any other emergencies there?
Can you repeat that question one more time, Stu? I'm sorry.
How does TVA respond differently for COVID than other emergencies?
Other emergencies? I don't think that we do. I think we respond exactly like we plan to do. We do drills for major events like earthquakes, pandemics, terrorist events, etc. You think of whatever the worst disaster you can think of. We actually do drills on those and plan for those. And the skeleton of how you deal with an event like that is the same, regardless of what the event is. The basics of how you execute that. The basic needs are kind of the same. But what throws you in for a loop is the actual event. What is that? The thing you didn't know. So overall, for this pandemic, we prepared for this for many years. There was the swine flu. Y'all remember this back, I think it was like 2009, 10, somewhere in there. And we did a lot of preparation back then because we thought we were going to get hit with the same situation we are today back then. And so we had a lot of things prepared already as we went into this.
Okay. Scott, I got another question for you. Is construction to close the Asian TVA fossil plant still progressing on schedule? Is that work deemed to be essential?
Yeah, the closure of all the fossil plants has remained on track, on schedule. Some of the, we've closed some plants already that are in the process of maybe a demolition situation. And so there may have been, I can think of one site where that particular work was stopped, just put on hold because they were at a good stopping point. So they put that on hold for, a month or so. But otherwise, everything's been working on schedule.
Okay. Scott, I got a question too. How do you differentiate between the essential and non-essential vendors to have access to your power plant sites? And if you can give an example, that would be great.
Well, for the power plant, on the power operation side, so I'm not on that side necessarily, but I will give you just a little insight on that, is that for vendors who needed to be there for critical operational needs, right? So whatever that might be, supplying equipment or supplies for that particular event, maybe it's an outage, maybe it's water treatment, something of those nature. They were deemed essential, and we just practiced social distancing. We check them before they come in with this self-check sheet, just like I was talking about, the same way we ran the projects. But the main goal for us from the power operations side was to limit access to a lot of different people to the actual control rooms so that we limited the exposure to operators.
Okay. Scott, another question that starts off, I assume power usage is below plan, less industrial productions, et cetera. Do you see any long-term changes in power usage due to the people becoming more accustomed to working remotely?
Well, I think we definitely, with the impact of this COVID, across the whole country, you can see various economic impacts. One of them being on the utilities, just from the fact that people aren't in offices, people aren't in restaurants, people aren't in manufacturing facilities, and so that effect on load definitely diminishes. It drops it dramatically. I think going forward, if more people telework, I don't see that really impacting the utility industry, because you still have to have manufacturing facilities, and we expect those to come back up. People will be out eating in restaurants. We see that coming back. You just may not be in big office complex. So I don't know. I think it balances out long term, and I honestly think long term we'll see that everything will spike back up. I don't know. Matt probably has some good insight on that or thoughts on that from an economic standpoint.
Now, Steve, got a question for you. And how are you dealing with crews coming in from out of town?
Great question, Stu. In fact, that policy we just implemented this week. So any of our subcontractors or staff that will be traveling back to the North Nevada area, we're going to be running them through our ACMED partner. ACMED will ask a series of questions to each individual in a private matter, and depending on how that individual answers those questions, that determines if they can actually come back to our region to actually work on our portfolio of projects. So our ACMED partners are doing an outstanding job. They're screening a lot of people actually yesterday and today. So the screening process seems to be working. And that way, by screening these individuals, it cuts down on the possible exposure.
Okay. Scott, got a question for you. Does COVID recalibrate perceptions and expectation for closure scheduling?
I guess it probably does. I mean, it certainly is now a factor that you didn't have before. And I can't even really speak to what the impact of that's going to be at the moment as we're looking at that ourselves. But I don't know, it's a good question. Okay. I don't have a great answer for that one, sorry.
Steve, if a contractor comes to your projects, do you require them to have a COVID plan in place? If so, can they still use their own plan, or are you requiring them to use your plan?
Yeah, actually what we're doing there, Stu, is we're taking those subcontractor plans, we evaluate those against our COVID-19 policies, and if they're very similar, we go ahead and let the subcontractor use theirs. If ours is more stringent, we go with our plan. So, we want to go with the most stringent plan to keep our people safe.
Okay, and that's all the questions, guys. So thank you again, Matt, Steve, Scott, for being on this roundtable discussion. And if anybody has any other questions later on, please use my email. And our plan is to keep these forums going on, to share information on what's working and really identify needs and solutions within our industry here. So we're going to plan to keep the roundtable discussions going on monthly. And and really look forward to the future conversations within our industry here. So thank you again to everyone for being on the call, and everyone please just stay safe and hope all is well. And that concludes